Okay, so today I'm making videos of covering history that was never taught to me in high school or in college. And I just did one on the Mexican American War, and I'm gonna do one on Black Wall Street. This is something that I learned by myself just going through YouTube, and never knew anything about this. And so I want to share this with my subscribers and people who follow me, and I always hear the argument of from racist people on, well, how come black people don't progress? How come they never, you don't see any successful black cities? And I always want to tell them, well, because when they did succeed, um, the racist white people around them, they don't like it so much, and they pretty much destroyed them. It's not just Black Wall Street. There's another event that I'm gonna cover too after this video, and just to show you that, yeah, the racism here in America has stopped certain groups from succeeding, and yet they don't cover this in the history classes, or at least they didn't cover it here in Texas. For me growing up, maybe they did it where you're at, but it's not for me. So let me share this with you.
Something terrible happened here, and for decades, people didn't talk about it.
See, like the video says, people didn't talk about this.
Adult before I ever heard about it. It was something that was hidden.
This entire historic community was obliterated.
Bodies dumped in rivers, bodies dumped in mass graves. It was an absolute massacre.
This story isn't one you'll find in most history books. And almost 100 years later, the facts of what exactly happened that day are still unraveling.
See, but when it looks bad on America, they don't like to cover it. They kind of just want to wash it away.
So we're driving in what's known as Black Wall Street. It's where one of the nation's worst episodes of racial violence took place.
In 1921, a neighborhood in Tulsa, Oklahoma called the Greenwood District was a bustling community of Black-owned businesses. Tulsa locals know that period of Greenwood's history as a kind of golden age.
If you can imagine just like an old-time downtown, things like movie theaters, pharmacies, hair salons, and so forth.
They called it Black Wall Street.
It was a mecca. It was a huge success.
But Black Wall Street was also an anomaly. It thrived at a time when the KKK was incredibly active in Oklahoma, and the nation had just been through the Red Summer of 1919, when white mobs murdered black people in dozens of incidents across the U.S.
There needed to be a sort of match or an igniter tossed on these embers. And that trigger event was an incident that involved two teenagers. Dick Rowland, 19-year-old black boy, he's shine shoes downtown. Sarah Page, 17-year-old white girl, ran an elevator in a downtown building called the Drexel Building. He went to the building, boarded the elevator, something happened, and Sarah Page began to scream.
See, I'm calling BS. So I heard this story, and apparently this white girl says that she got assaulted by this dude. And this is a time like way before the Me Too movement, but it was a Me Too movement of, if a white girl said it, it must be true. Believe all white women was the thing back then, especially if it was against black people. It's and it's almost, I don't even believe that it happened. They just people needed a reason to get a mob up and like, hey, let's go get them.
They both ran out of the elevator.
Now, we don't know exactly what happened in this elevator, but a day later, Rowland was arrested and taken to the courthouse. The local newspaper ran an article claiming Rowland had assaulted Page. Even though Page refused to press charges, the article was essentially a call to action for whites.
A large white mob began to gather on the lawn of the courthouse. Dick Rowland was in jail on the top floor. A number of black men, several dozen, marched down to the courthouse to protect him, some of them armed. There was a struggle between one of the black men in the small group and one of the white men in the larger group, and things sort of went south from that point.
Hundreds of white people descended upon Black Wall Street, armed. Black residents withdrew behind the railroad tracks that marked off the Greenwood district. Some of them were armed and fought back, but they were outnumbered by the white mob, which shot their way through. The white mob murdered, they looted, and they set fire to Black Wall Street.
This was the
They did more than that, man. They flew freaking planes, and dropped bombs from planes. You know, they destroyed the whole community. You know, over an alleged attack. You know.
strategy, if you will, of how to deal with these communities, with these successful black.
Again, just like the Mexican-American War that I covered in my last episode, sometimes these groups, they use a small event, an alleged event, to escalate a larger attack. And it's almost like they're just planting a false flag, ready to rally up the troops, you know. Just something to keep in mind, because if they did it before, multiple times, I'm going to cover several times throughout my YouTube channel of all these false flags, that it could happen again, you know.
Black communities. The effects were disastrous.
For 2 days, the Greenwood district burned. Martial law was declared, and the National Guard was brought in. By the time the massacre ended, Greenwood was in ruins. More than 1,200 homes were destroyed, and 35 blocks burned. The exact number of casualties is harder to pin down. Some initially only reported that white people died. Others reported somewhere between 30 and 100 mostly black casualties. But estimates now put that number closer to 300. As for those that survived, thousands of them lived in tent cities in the months that followed, and were left to pick up the pieces of rubble they once called home. After the massacre, the cover-up started. Records went missing from city files, including the very article that started it all. It makes photos from this time all the more important as part of the historical record, but back in 1921, these images served a very different purpose.
See, again, just like you might call me conspiracy theorist or something, because I talk about how they don't talk about the Mexican-American War, but look how they're doing Black Wall Street. How they try to cover up when they know they're in the wrong. You know, they don't want people to find out certain their dirty laundry. You know, this is, like I said, this isn't the first story like this. I'm gonna cover multiple throughout my through the course of this channel.
So photo postcards like these were pretty widely distributed after the massacre. At the time, they were part of white supremacist culture and kept as souvenirs of racially charged crimes.
Now they're preserved to make sure this part of Tulsa's history isn't forgotten, and they paint a clear picture of how much destruction there was that day. On the postcards, it's called the Tulsa Race Riot, a name that itself sort of erases what really happened.
By calling it a riot, it's a way of trying to rewrite the history, assuming that there were both sides at fault, and that was not the case. I call it a massacre, and I call it that because that's what it was.
Greenwood eventually rebuilt, but nearly a century later, there's a part of this story that still haunts the city. No one actually knows where the victims' bodies are.
We got to find our people. We got to put them at rest. You know, if not, we continue to be haunted by.
In all likelihood, they probably they probably burn them all to death because when you have that many bodies, that's usually what they do. They put them in a pile and burn them.
What was done so many years ago.
Kevin Ross, a local writer, is one of many in Tulsa descended from people who lost everything in the massacre.
So in this cemetery, there are only 2 official victims of the Tulsa Race Massacre. How many victims do you think there are?
After all these years, I think 300 is putting it mild.
In 1997, the city finally put together a commission to study the massacre and help piece together what happened in 1921. They compiled records and eyewitness accounts.
The bullets were just raining down over us.
They set our house on fire and went right straight to the curtains and set the curtains on fire.
These accounts are especially important now because none of these survivors are alive anymore. And they also provided new information. Some mentioned trucks, like this one, loaded with victims of the riot. One riot witness in particular came forth testifying that he saw bodies being dumped in Oaklawn Cemetery.
This is it. This is the area.
Using the survivor accounts, records, and eventually radar, the city was able to pinpoint 3 locations with anomalies in the soil. Only one step was left: to excavate. But it was something the city at the time wasn't up for doing. For many Tulsans, it was a part of history best forgotten and not worth investigating. In some ways, today, that sentiment remains.
Kind of waste of money.
Why do you think that?
It's over, it's done.
But there are clear signs of a city that's ready to come to terms with a dark chapter in its history.
Honestly, that's a lot of missing people that probably had families.
We owe it to the people whose blood has actually fertilized the grounds of this place.
There was a tremendous amount of racism.
Injustice plus time does not equal justice.
Today, a new mayor is reopening the investigation.
I think a pretty basic compact that a city makes with its citizens is, if somebody murders you, we will do everything we can to find out what happened to you and give your family closure. And whether you were murdered yesterday or you were murdered 98 years ago.
The city will be looking into the 3 areas that the commission noted. That process of finding out what lies beneath Tulsa and DNA matching any remains with descendants could take years.
Okay, so this is why I also want to talk about, if we know that history is written by the victor, because you'll hear that quote being said all the time, then wouldn't you think that the history that you are learning, and wherever you're at, in whatever nation you're in, you're learning a biased point of history, then wouldn't you want an objective point of view of history? This is why I always ask questions when I'm learning history. As a kid, I asked questions, and I always did my own research, like anytime. And it was, I always felt like an anomaly because I was like a teacher, even in high school. My teacher would tell me an event, and I would ask, I wouldn't just go with the flow, with the common response. Like I remember specifically one of my history classes, we were learning about the Vietnam War, and mainly that part of our justification was to stop the spread of communism. Because of the domino effect that if Vietnam became communist, then other nations will become communist. And I asked my teacher, I'm like, so what if other countries want to be communist? Let them, that's, they're sovereign, I didn't know sovereign at the time, but now I'll say it. They're sovereign nations, why can't they be communists if they want to be communists, If it works for them, let them do it. And she was like, no, you don't understand. I'm like, well, explain to me. And she couldn't. And I was like, you never thought to question certain things? And even when 9/11 happened during when I was like in 7th grade. First thing I did was ask, why do they do it? And I didn't go with the first thing. Oh, they hate us and this and that. I always asked for years, and I eventually did my own research before. I know Osama bin Laden's like letter recently became like kind of went viral like about a year ago, but I had read his fatwa a long time ago, and it not that I was trying to justify it. I just want to understand the other person's point of view. Always, not saying that I agree with it, but I'm always looking for another person's point of view just to get a better understanding of what's going on. Like if I see a fight going on, I want to hear what happened to the fight. I don't want to just hear one person's account of events. I want to hear both. I'm like, what got this person so angry that they decided to fight this other person? I just don't say, oh yeah, they got into a fight. There's no more need to look into it. But yet that's always the case here, at least my upbringing. Pearl Harbor was another one that I've always asked. And I remember specifically, I asked my college professor, why did Japan attack the U.S.? He goes, you know what? That's a good question. No one's ever asked me that. And he goes, I don't know the answer. And I was like, you don't know the answer to what this major attack? You know that it happened. You can tell me the date, but you don't know why. And again, I did my own research on that just to find out, why would they do this? And again, just not trying to justify it, but to try to get their point of view. Again, I'll always try to see where everybody's coming from. Also to learn, like if let's just say if we did something that pisses somebody off, learn as a nation that okay, maybe we shouldn't do certain things because it would cause an attack on us. That was kind of part of my mindset too. Well, anywho, this is Black Wall Street. This is something, again, it was, I only learned this through YouTube. Hopefully this is something that you learned. If you know of another historical thing, an atrocity that happened here in the United States, and it is not covered at all, please put it in the comments, and I'll cover it if I think I should. I'm gonna cover a couple, at least one more before I call it a night.